Chapter 1. The Girl in Chains. The marketplace of Valrose Prime was a place where morality had no meaning, where the value of life was measured in credits, and where the weak had only two choices: serve or suffer. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal, spiced liquors, and the sweat of too many bodies crammed into one lawless den of filth and greed. Dim neon lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow across the uneven stone walkways, the broken remnants of a civilization that had long since fallen to corruption. Ethan Voss had no business being here. And yet, here he was, moving through the twisting alleyways, his boots kicking up the fine layer of dust and spilled alcohol that coated the ground. He had spent years hopping from one broken-down outpost to another, taking whatever repair jobs he could find, fixing engines, weapons, shields, anything that kept a ship running long enough for its owner to leave the system before trouble caught up to them. He had never asked too many questions, never gotten involved, never made the mistake of caring about things that were out of his control. Until now. Until he saw her. The auction platform stood at the center of the market's main square, raised high above the filth and desperation, a stage for the worst kind of transaction, a place where beings were bought and sold like commodities, where slavers bartered over the price of living flesh, where the rich indulged their cruelest whims, and the broken were reduced to objects for entertainment. And at the very center of it, chained and bound, stood the most captivating being Ethan had ever seen. She wasn't human. Her silver-toned skin glowed faintly under the neon lights, as if she were forged from starlight itself. Her hair, long and flowing, shimmered with hues of violet and blue, shifting like liquid metal as she moved. Her eyes piercing, vibrant gold held a fire that refused to be extinguished, even as the heavy metal bindings kept her shackled to the platform. She wore what must have once been royal attire, now torn and dirted, the intricate fabrics reduced to rags that did little to conceal the strength and grace of the figure beneath them. She was not a mere captive. She had been someone important, and now, she was being sold like common property. Ethan's gut twisted as the auctioneer, a bloated alien with too many cybernetic implants distorting his voice, barked out the starting bid. 300,000 credits. A fine specimen, rare and exotic. Strong of body, sharp of mind royalty, they say, though what does that matter now? His twisted laughter echoed through the market, met with chuckles and murmurs from the crowd. She will serve in whatever way you desire. Break her spirit, or let her keep it their way, she is yours. The bidding began. Ethan wasn't rich. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't someone who got involved. And yet, as he watched the aliens, warlords, and slavers toss their bids, debating her worth as if she were nothing more than a piece of valuable machinery, something inside him snapped. Because it wasn't just cruelty. It wasn't just wrong. It was personal. He didn't know who she was, or why she mattered so much, but the moment her gaze locked onto his, silent, unwavering, filled with something deeper than just fear or desperation, he knew. He was going to get her out of there, one way or another. The chains that could not be broken. Ethan didn't bid. He didn't have the credits to play that game. Even if he had, there was no point. Whoever won this auction wasn't going to let their new prize go without a fight. So he did what he did best. He watched, listened, waited. The highest bidder was a Sarkin slaver, a towering brute with thick, armored skin and a reputation for breaking even the most defiant captives. He paid 800,000 credits, an amount that made the crowd murmur in appreciation, impressed at how much one could spend for a single piece of living property. The slaver approached the platform, grinning, his massive hands tightening around a shock collar as he stepped toward the captive. And that was when she moved. Despite the chains, despite the brutal arcane symbols glowing faintly along the metal restraints, she lunged fast, vicious, her entire body coiling with raw power, and for a brief, glorious second, Ethan saw what she really was. Not a victim, not a prisoner, a warrior. But the chains glowed brighter, and whatever force they carried drained her strength instantly, making her collapse to her knees, panting, her body trembling under the weight of some unseen force. The slaver laughed, grabbing a handful of her shimmering hair, yanking her head back as he sneered down at her. "Oh, you'll be fun," he muttered, clicking the collar into place. "We'll see how long that spirit lasts." And something inside Ethan ignited. He moved. Not because he had a plan. Not because it was the smart thing to do. But because he refused to let this happen, he had fought before, had been in his fair share of bar brawls, but this was different. He wasn't fighting for himself. He wasn't fighting to survive another day. He was fighting for her. The first blow. Ethan struck before anyone realized he was there. His fist connected with the side of the slaver's skull, the impact sending a shockwave through the crowd as the massive brute staggered back, roaring in fury. The entire marketplace fell into chaos, guards and slavers turning, weapons raising, the auctioneer screeching in outrage, but Ethan didn't stop. He reached for the chains, his fingers wrapping around the glowing, ancient metal, and the moment he touched them, something exploded through his mind, a flash of symbols, ancient voices whispering in a language he didn't understand. A feeling of power locked away behind layers of magic and technology. And then, the chains shattered. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from the metal, throwing Ethan backward, sending shockwaves through the square, making every single electronic device in the vicinity flicker and fail. The girl, now free, slowly rose to her feet. And for the first time, Ethan saw her true power. The golden glow in her eyes burned brighter, the air around her crackling with energy, her once weakened body straightening into the posture of a warrior, a queen, a force that could not be broken. The slaver tried to react, but he didn't get the chance. She moved like lightning, faster than his massive form could track, her hands moving in a fluid, deadly arc. One strike, a flash of movement, a pulse of unseen force, and the slaver collapsed, gasping, his body locking up in shock and pain. Ethan barely had time to process what had happened before she turned to him, stepping down from the platform, standing before him in the wreckage of the chains he had just destroyed. "You," she whispered, her voice both strong and uncertain, as if she herself couldn't believe what had just happened. "You broke the chains." Ethan, panting, bruised, and barely standing, grinned. "Yeah," he said. "Guess I did." And then the guards opened fire. Chapter 2. The Escape. The moment the chains shattered, the entire marketplace of Valrose Prime erupted into chaos. Blinding energy crackled in the air, the arcane symbols that had once bound the alien girl flaring before collapsing into nothingness, leaving behind a silence so thick it seemed to crush the noise around it for a single, impossible moment. Then everything exploded into motion. The slaver guards, stunned for only a fraction of a second, reacted with violent efficiency, raising plasma rifles, their armor clanking as they moved to block the exits. The auctioneer screeched into a distorted intercom, his mechanical voice warping in his panic as he ordered the square to be locked down. And Ethan Voss, still reeling from whatever had just happened, realized that he had just started a war in the worst possible place. The alien girl, now free, now unleashed, stood beside him, her golden eyes still burning with a raw, ancient fire, her body tense with power that had been kept locked away for too long. Ethan had no plan, no weapons, and no clear idea of how they were going to get out of this alive. But none of that mattered anymore, because the guards were already opening fire. The first volley of plasma shots screeched through the air, scorching the ground where Ethan had been standing seconds earlier. He dove to the side, rolling behind a rusted-out vendor's stall, his heart hammering as the heat from the near miss sent his skin prickling. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone, the energy blasts cutting through the marketplace with deadly precision. But it wasn't Ethan the guards were focused on. It was her. The slavers had spent a fortune on this prize. They weren't going to let her go easily. She moved before they could lock onto her, her body a blur of motion, unnatural, impossibly fast. She ducked low, twisting through the scattered debris of the market, avoiding the gunfire with an elegance that seemed almost inhuman, her glowing silver hair flowing behind her as she closed the distance between herself and the nearest guard in the blink of an eye. Ethan barely had time to register what happened next. She struck with a single palm against the soldier's chest, and the moment her hand connected, a shockwave of golden energy erupted outward, sending the armored brute flying back 20 feet, slamming him into a rusted storage unit with a sickening crunch. For a split second, everything stopped. The remaining slavers hesitated. Ethan gaped. Even she looked at her own hands as if she didn't entirely understand what had just happened. Then the moment was gone, and all hell broke loose. The guards charged, abandoning their weapons, realizing too late that bullets and plasma wouldn't be enough. They rushed her, trying to overwhelm her with sheer numbers. But it was a mistake, a fatal one. She moved through them like a living storm, striking with precise, effortless force, her every motion carrying a terrible, fluid grace. Ethan had seen fighters before, had worked with mercenaries and bounty hunters, had once even been held at gunpoint by a cybernetic assassin who had left nothing but blood in his wake. But this wasn't just combat. It was art. A single strike sent one guard collapsing into a heap. A step forward, a twisting movement, and another went down, his rifle crushed in her grip like it was made of paper. One of the larger slavers, a towering beast of muscle and brute strength, swung at her with a shock baton, its electric current sizzling as it arced toward her. She caught it in midair, her fingers wrapping around the pulsating weapon. Then, with no effort at all, she ripped it from his grasp, spun, and struck him across the head with his own weapon, sending him sprawling unconscious to the ground. Ethan snapped himself out of his trance. They had a chance. They had a way out. But they had to move now. Over here, Ethan shouted, already racing toward the back alleyways, his mind working fast, trying to remember the layout of the market, the exits, the paths smugglers used when deals went bad. He had only been on Valrose Prime for a few weeks, but it was enough. He knew where the patrol routes were thinner, where the security systems were weakest. The alien girl gods, he needed to ask her name later if they survived this, whipped around, following him instantly, her movements sharp, deliberate. Behind them, the remaining guards recovered, their fury burning through their hesitation. More were coming. A lot more. Ethan sprinted through the narrow passageways, dodging between stacks of abandoned cargo crates, malfunctioning vending machines, and twisted metal structures that jutted out from the walls like skeletal remains of a forgotten city. His ship. He just had to get them to his damn ship. The hangars were located on the far side of the market, but getting there meant crossing open ground, and if they were spotted before they reached it, they were dead. As they ran, Ethan stole a glance at her, watching the way she moved, light, impossibly agile, her breath steady despite everything they had just been through. Who the hell was she? And why was she so damn important that the galaxy's worst scum were willing to kill to keep her imprisoned? They reached the outer edge of the marketplace, bursting into a wide docking district, the dim glow of ship engines burning through the industrial haze. Ethan's vessel, a beat-up freighter he had stolen from a scrapyard 3 years ago and somehow kept running ever since, was parked at the very back of the hangar, its rusted hull barely holding together, its thrusters leaking coolant, its landing gear groaning from age. But it was his, and it was fast. The guards weren't far behind. Ethan slammed his hand against the access panel, overriding the security lock, the ship's doors hissing open with agonizing slowness. Inside now, he barked. The alien girl didn't hesitate. She vaulted through the hatch with impossible speed, landing smoothly inside, her eyes flashing as she turned back to him. Ethan was halfway up the ramp when he heard the gunfire. A searing burn ripped through his shoulder, the impact spinning him off balance, sending him crashing into the ship's metal flooring. He barely registered the pain before he felt hands gripping him, pulling him inside. And then, the ship's interior lights flared. The hatch sealed shut, and the entire vessel lurched beneath them as she took the controls, her fingers flying over the unfamiliar interface as if she had been born to fly it. Ethan groaned, rolling onto his back, clutching his shoulder, watching as the hangar and the planet below shrank beneath them, disappearing into the endless void of space. They had escaped, but the real danger was only just beginning. She turned to him, her golden eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name, something ancient, something powerful. "You freed me," she whispered. Ethan exhaled, laughing breathlessly despite the pain. "Yeah," he muttered. "Guess I did." A pause. Then, "My name is Saris." And just like that, Ethan realized his life would never be the same again. Chapter 3. The hunt begins. The cold hum of the ship's engine filled the cabin, a steady vibration pulsing through the metal floor, mixing with the distant thrum of hyperspace. It should have been a comforting sound, a sign that they had escaped Valrose Prime, that they were safe for now. But Ethan Voss knew better. No one escaped the kind of trouble they had just started. He sat against the bulkhead, his breath slow and measured, pain burning in his shoulder where the plasma bolt had grazed him during their escape. The wound wasn't lethal, but it was deep enough to make his arm feel like it had been set on fire. The raw flesh beneath his torn shirt streaked with blood and cauterized burns. He had been in fights before, had taken his share of wounds, but this was different, because this time, he had no idea what the hell he had just gotten himself into. Saris stood near the cockpit, her back to him, her hands gripping the ship's console with the kind of tension that spoke of something deeper than just exhaustion. She was staring at the NAV charts, at the coordinates they had plotted at random to shake off any pursuers, but Ethan could see it in her posture. In the way her shoulders were set, she wasn't just thinking about where they were going. She was thinking about who was coming after them. Saris, Ethan finally spoke, his voice rough from the lingering pain. You mind telling me what the hell just happened back there? She turned slowly, her golden eyes flickering in the dim light of the ship's cabin. The fire in them had dulled somewhat, but the intensity had not faded. If anything, it had grown sharper, more focused. You freed me, she said, as if that alone was enough explanation. Ethan exhaled a laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, I caught that part. What I don't understand is why no one else could. What was up with those chains? The moment I touched them, it was like they broke themselves. Saris studied him, tilting her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she stepped closer, lowering herself to sit on the metal floor across from him. The movement was smooth, controlled, yet he could still see the faint tremor in her limbs, the aftershocks of what had happened back in the market. The chains were not just physical restraints, she said at last. They were bonded to my essence type of binding magic mixed with technology, something that should have been unbreakable. Ethan frowned. Magic? Saris arched an eyebrow. Do humans not believe in such things? He shrugged, wincing at the pull on his wound. I believe in what I see, and I saw those chains explode the moment I touched them. So, yeah, I'm willing to call it whatever you want. What I don't understand is why it worked for me. Saris was silent for a moment, as if debating something internally. Then, she extended her hand toward him, palm up. Give me your arm, she said. Ethan hesitated, his instincts flashing a warning. But there was something in the way she looked at him, not demanding, not forceful, just searching. With a sigh, he relented, extending his uninjured arm toward her. She placed her hand lightly over his, and the moment her skin touched his, something surged between them. A rush of energy, ancient and vast, curled through his veins like liquid fire, not painful, but heavy. A weight that settled in his chest like something had just recognized him, marked him. His pulse quickened, his breath catching in his throat, and for a brief, impossible second, he saw something images, flashes of memories that were not his own. A grand palace of silver and stone, burning against the night. A throne carved from obsidian, empty and waiting. A sky filled with ships, not attacking, but fleeing. A girl, younger, standing at the edge of a ruined temple, her hands bound in chains that glowed with power too vast for any mortal to comprehend. Then nothing. Saris pulled her hand back sharply, her eyes wide with something Ethan could only describe as shock. That's not possible, she whispered. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind still reeling. Okay, you want to let me in on what the hell that was? Saris didn't answer right away. She was staring at her own hands, as if she no longer recognized them. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. The reason no one else could break those chains is because they were forged specifically to bind me. My power, my bloodline, it is tied to an ancient force, something that most have forgotten, something that should have been lost to time. She looked up at him, her golden gaze piercing. Only someone with a connection to that same force could have broken them. Ethan felt a chill creep down his spine. And you're saying, I have that connection? I don't know, she admitted, but I saw something in you, and that should not be possible. He exhaled slowly, trying to process everything. So what? I'm suddenly some kind of chosen one? A long-lost warrior destined to save the galaxy? Because let me tell you, I'm just a mechanic. A guy who fixes things that are broken. Saris gave a small, almost sad smile. Perhaps that is exactly why it was you who freed me. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, glancing toward the ship's control panel. Well, whether or not I'm some kind of cosmic key to an ancient bloodline, we've got a bigger problem. Saris nodded. The ones who enslaved me will not stop hunting us. That's what I figured. He tapped the screen, pulling up a scan of the surrounding systems. We need to disappear. Fast. Any place in the galaxy you can think of where we won't immediately get shot at? Saris hesitated, her expression tightening. There is. One place. But it is not without risk. Ethan raised an eyebrow. At this point, I don't think we have a choice. Where is it? She exhaled, her voice laced with something old and distant. The ruins of my people's last stronghold. A world known as Velmara. Ethan frowned, searching the NAV charts. Never heard of it. You wouldn't have, she said softly. It was erased from most star maps centuries ago. But if I am right, there may still be something there that can help us. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Well, I did just break magic chains with my bare hands, so sure, why not? Let's go to the lost world. Sarah smiled, but there was something haunted in her gaze, as if she knew what they were about to walk into. Ethan didn't ask, because deep down, he knew that whatever had happened to Saris, whatever had led to her imprisonment, was about to become his problem, too. And whoever was hunting her would soon be hunting him as well. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had been a mechanic all his life, but somehow, he had just become something else entirely, and he had a feeling he wasn't ready for what came next. Chapter 4. The Last Throne of Velmara. The hyperspace tunnel stretched endlessly before them, a twisting, shimmering path of blue and white streaks that pulsed with a rhythmic hum. Ethan had spent countless hours staring into these swirling corridors of light, piloting ships across the vast expanse of the galaxy, but tonight, it felt different. Tonight, he wasn't just a mechanic running from a bad deal gone worse. He was heading towards something far older, far bigger than himself. Saris sat in the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes locked onto the navigational display, her fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic pattern against her armrest. She was tense, her usual grace dulled by the weight of something unseen, something buried deep beneath the surface of her thoughts. Ethan had spent enough time with people running from their pasts to know that whatever they were about to find on Velmara, it wasn't going to be pleasant. Tell me about it, he said finally, breaking the silence between them. This place we're headed to. Velmara. Saris exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a brief moment before she spoke. It was once the seat of my people's power. A world that thrived with beauty and knowledge, where scholars and warriors alike gathered to shape the future of the stars. It was our heart. She opened her eyes again, but there was something hollow in them now. And then it became our grave. Ethan frowned, adjusting their course slightly. You said it was erased from star maps. Why? Saris didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walking toward the viewport, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture rigid with old memories clawing their way back to the surface. There was a war, she said at last. Not like the ones you know. Not fought with fleets or armies, not over resources or territory. It was a war of existence. A war we did not understand until it was too late. She turned, her gaze locking onto him with a fierce intensity. They came from the void. Not from another empire, not from another system, from somewhere beyond the reach of our understanding. We called them the unseen, for we could not comprehend their presence. We only knew that where they walked, our worlds fell. Ethan felt a cold chill crawl down his spine. You're saying an entire civilization was wiped out? Just like that? She nodded. Not just mine. Many others. Some fought. Some ran. But none survived. Ethan swallowed hard, glancing at the control panel, suddenly feeling very small in the vastness of space. And you think we'll find something on Velmara that can help us? Saris hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I don't know. The moment they dropped out of hyperspace, the ship's sensors began screaming warnings. Velmara was not a dead world. It was dying. The planet stretched before them, once lush, now a withered husk, its surface scarred by massive craters, dried-up oceans, and the ruins of cities that had long since crumbled to dust. The atmosphere flickered with static discharges, storms that had raged for centuries without rest. And yet, despite the overwhelming sense of abandonment, something felt wrong. Ethan's grip tightened on the controls as he scanned the surface. "We're not alone," he muttered. Saris's breath caught. "They're here." Below them, barely visible through the storm, a fleet was waiting. Sleek, black vessels hovered over the ruins, their designs unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Twisted, jagged ships that seemed to absorb the light around them, their presence an unnatural void in the already dying world. And in the center of it all, standing atop what remained of a once great temple, was a figure. Tall, cloaked in shifting darkness, waiting for them. The descent. Ethan's ship touched down on the planet's surface with a groan of protest, the landing gear sinking slightly into the cracked, ashen ground. The wind howled around them, kicking up dust and remnants of a forgotten age, making the ruins seem alive with whispers of the past. Ethan checked his sidearm, knowing full well it wouldn't be enough, then turned to Saris. "This is your show," he said. "Where do we go from here?" Saris didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes, taking a slow breath, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, without a word, she stepped forward, moving with purpose toward the temple ruins. Ethan followed. The closer they got, the colder the air became, though there was no logical reason for it. The very fabric of reality seemed thinner here. The walls of existence stretched taut over something buried, waiting. Then, they reached the temple steps, and the figure moved. A voice echoed through the ruins, though the lips of the being before them never moved. "You should not have come here." Ethan froze. The voice was not a voice, it was something deeper, something that crawled into his skull, that bypassed sound entirely, that spoke directly to the core of his being. Saris, however, stood her ground. "You already lost," she said. "Your chains are broken. Your hold on me is gone." A pause. Then, the being's dark form shifted, pulsing with something unnatural. "We do not lose. We simply wait." Then it attacked. The fight was not physical. Ethan realized that too late. The moment the being lunged, reality itself fractured, and suddenly he was no longer standing in the ruins of Velmara. He was floating in a sea of memories that were not his own. Cities burning, stars collapsing, a throne room filled with golden light, its walls shaking from the screams of those who had died to protect it. Saris, younger, standing before a council of figures who looked like her but were not her, their faces filled with fear. A voice, Saris's voice, echoing through the fractures of time. "We cannot fight them. We can only hide, only seal ourselves away." And then, something else, something far worse. The darkness that had devoured her people, the thing that had erased them from history, turning its attention toward him, toward all of them. Ethan felt something inside him stir, something old and waiting, something that should not have been there. The moment he realized it, he was back. The ruins, the temple, Saris kneeling, struggling against some unseen force, and the being of darkness standing before them, waiting for Ethan. "You are the key." He didn't know what that meant, but he knew one thing. This thing, the force that had hunted Saris's people into extinction, was afraid of him. And so, with no plan, no understanding, and no idea what was about to happen, he did the only thing he could think of. He reached out and touched the void. The last thing he heard before everything turned to white, Saris whispering his name. Epilogue. The broken cycle. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was somewhere new. Not the temple, not Velmara, but a place outside of time, outside of existence itself. And before him, something older than the stars whispered, "The cycle is broken. What happens next is up to you." He exhaled. Then, as reality reformed around him, as he felt Saris's hand grasp his, pulling him back to the world, he made his choice, and nothing would ever be the same again.